My son, David, hugged me at the door with a grip that felt just a little too tight. He smelled like expensive coffee and big city stress. "It's only for a week, Mom," he said, his voice breezy, but his eyes never quite met mine. Behind him, his wife Chloe stood by the car. She was smiling so hard it looked painful, the kind of over-rehearsed smile people wear when they're trying to bury a secret under a layer of sweetness. They told me her father, Mr. Henderson, was in a deep, unresponsive coma after a fender bender. They said he needed someone older, someone with gentle hands and infinite patience, to keep watch while they took a short trip to settle his affairs. I believed them. God help me, I wanted to believe my own flesh and blood. But the moment their car pulled away and the house fell into that heavy, ringing silence, the air changed. I walked back to the guest room to check on the man they said could not wake up. I was humming an old lullaby to calm my own nerves, reaching down to straighten his blanket, when his fingers suddenly twitched. Then, his hand, cold and trembling, clamped onto my wrist. His eyes opened just a sliver, bloodshot and terrified. His voice came out like a thread of ice, a whisper that seemed to freeze the very marrow in my bones. He didn't ask for water, and he didn't ask for a doctor. He whispered, "Help me, they're keeping me under." I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But it was the next thing he said that made my blood turn to lead. He wasn't talking about his own pain anymore, he was talking about mine. He whispered that he had heard them late at night, standing over his bed, talking about my savings, my house, and how easy it would be to make a confused old woman disappear into the same quiet fog they had trapped him in. Right then, I realized the danger wasn't just in that bed. It was in my own trust. And I was all alone in a house that suddenly felt like a cage. I stood there in that dim guest room, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was looking down at a man who was supposed to be a vegetable, but instead, he was a witness. I felt the house shift around me, like the walls themselves had been holding their breath until David and Chloe were gone. I wanted to run. I wanted to grab my keys, bolt out the front door, and call David, screaming for an explanation. But that whisper about my money sat in my stomach like a heavy, cold stone. If I called him now, would he tell me the truth? Or would he just alert Chloe that their patient had finally spoken? I leaned in closer to Mr. Henderson, keeping my voice so low it was barely a breath. I asked him what he meant, my eyes darting toward the hallway every few seconds. I half expected Chloe to burst through the door, even though I'd seen their car turn the corner minutes ago. He swallowed hard, his lips cracked and dry. He told me they had been shuffling bottles in the kitchen, giving him pills that made his tongue feel like lead and his brain feel like it was wrapped in wet wool. He was trapped behind his own eyelids, a prisoner in his own skin, forced to listen to them plan their future using his pension and my life savings as the foundation. He tried to lift his hand again, but it shook like a leaf in a storm. I saw a look in that grown man's eyes that I'll never forget. It wasn't the fear of death or the fear of sickness. It was the raw, jagged terror of being betrayed by the people you once carried in your arms. I told him to blink if he could understand me. Just once. He did, one steady, deliberate blink. In that moment, I knew I wasn't just doing a family favor. I was standing in the middle of a crime scene. Whatever they had planned, they had banked on two things: Mr. Henderson staying silent, and me staying obedient. They hadn't expected him to find his voice the second they walked out the door. I stepped back and stood between the bed and the doorway. I wasn't a strong woman, and I wasn't a young one, but something in my soul clicked into place. This room was now a secret, and in my experience, secrets only get people hurt when they are spoken too loud before you're ready to fight. I reached out and pulled the blanket up to Mr. Henderson's chin, tucking him in with the same careful, practiced motions David and Chloe had shown me. I did it because I needed to look like the helpful, unsuspecting grandmother they thought I was, just in case a neighbor was watching or a camera was hidden in the molding. But as I smoothed the fabric, a wave of hot, stinging shame washed over me. At my age, you'd think I'd know better. You'd think I'd be able to spot a lie before it sat down at my dinner table. My name is Martha, and I've lived long enough to watch the world change a dozen times over. I've watched love turn quiet and promises turn into hollow excuses, but I never, not in my darkest nightmare, thought I would watch my own son carry a lie into my house and lay it down like a heavy blanket. I raised David in a tiny apartment where the radiators hissed all winter and the street noise never stopped. I worked double shifts, the kind of jobs that make your feet ache and your hands rough, just to make sure he felt safe. I wasn't a perfect mother, but I was there. I taught him that when someone is weak, you don't take from them, you stand between them and whatever is trying to do them harm. That's why, when he asked me for this favor, I didn't hesitate. Helping was who I was. And the chilling part? David knew that. He used the very heart I gave him to pick the lock on my trust. And then there was Chloe. She entered our lives with a smile that could charm a room and manners that looked perfect on a postcard. But there were moments, small, quiet flashes, when her eyes stayed cold while her mouth was laughing. She listened to me talk about my retirement and my little nest egg not like a daughter-in-law, but like an accountant cataloging assets. I told myself I was being old-fashioned. I told myself I was being a jealous mother. But standing there by that bed, watching Mr. Henderson fight for every drugged breath just to warn me, all my excuses crumbled into dust. I thought about the way Chloe had said my name when she asked for help. It was so sweet, so respectful. But now, in the silence of that room, it sounded different. It sounded like she was testing the weight of a tool to see how easily it would move into place. I looked at Mr. Henderson again and realized he wasn't just a sick man. He was a mirror. If they could do this to him, her own father, then what was stopping them from doing it to me? The answer was nothing. Nothing but the thin thread of consciousness this man was clinging to. I had to move. I had to think. But more than anything, I had to keep my breathing steady, because in a house full of lies, the truth is the most dangerous noise you can make. I had to see it for myself. I needed something more than whispers and shadows. I needed the kind of proof that wouldn't wash away when the sun came up. I left the guest room, my footsteps light on the hardwood, and headed for the kitchen. I opened the cabinet Chloe had pointed out on the very first day, the one she called the care station. There they were. Dozens of little plastic bottles lined up like a tiny, orange army. I picked one up, my hands trembling so hard the pills rattled inside like dry bones. I pulled my reading glasses from my apron pocket and squinted at the labels. Some had Mr. Henderson's name, but others had no labels at all. Just white tape with handwritten dosages in Chloe's neat, sharp cursive. I recognized the names of the drugs from my own husband's final days, heavy-duty sedatives, the kind that don't just help you sleep, they pull a curtain over your soul. The dosage written on the tape was double what any doctor would prescribe for a man recovering at home. My stomach did a slow, sickening flip. This wasn't medicine, it was a chemical cage. I went back to the guest room, my heart cold as stone. On the bedside table sat a small plastic cup with a residue of white powder at the bottom. I leaned down and sniffed it. It was bitter and metallic, a smell that didn't belong in a home filled with love. I looked at my phone sitting on the nightstand. I realized that in this digital age, he said, she said wouldn't be enough to stop David and Chloe. I needed the world to hear what I heard. I reached for the phone with fingers that felt like they belonged to a stranger. I pressed the record button and tucked the phone half under the pillow, making sure the microphone was clear but the screen stayed dark. I leaned over Mr. Henderson and whispered, "Tell me again. Tell me what they said about the papers." He struggled, his chest heaving as he fought the fog. He whispered about a power of attorney, about a pension transfer, and then, he said my name. He said they laughed about how a mother's love is the perfect blindfold. They were going to have me sign as a witness to his mental decline, making me the person who unknowingly handed them the keys to everything he owned, and then everything I owned. I felt a flash of hot, righteous anger. It's one thing to be a thief, but it's another thing entirely to turn a mother's devotion into a weapon. I wasn't just a dependable old woman to them. I was the final piece of their puzzle. I hit save on that recording and tucked the phone into my brassiere. I couldn't afford to be confused anymore. I couldn't afford to wait for David to come back and give me a hug that was really a trap. The man in that bed had risked his life to save mine, and now, it was my turn to return the favor. I stepped out of the guest room and pulled the door shut until it was just a tiny crack. I needed to hear if Mr. Henderson's breathing changed, but I also needed the shadows of the hallway to hide me. I stood there in the dark, my thumb hovering over the keypad of my phone. Calling for help meant more than just dialing 3 numbers. It meant admitting, out loud and to a stranger, that my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the man I had toasted at his wedding, was a monster in the making. It meant breaking my own heart to save my soul. But then I looked at my hands. They were shaking, but they were the same hands that had worked 40 years to build a life. I wouldn't let those hands be used to sign away a man's life or my own dignity. I dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. It was steady, low, and hard as a New York sidewalk. I told her there was an elderly man in my home who had been drugged. I told her the people meant to care for him had fled the city. And I told her that if they didn't send an ambulance right now, I didn't think he'd make it to sunrise. The dispatcher asked me if I was safe. I looked at the front door, locked and bolted, and then at the dark hallway leading to a house full of stolen secrets. "I'm safe for now," I whispered. "But the people who did this, they're coming back." While I waited, those minutes felt like hours. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Every headlights that swept across the living room curtains made my blood run cold. I went back into the room and sat beside Mr. Henderson. I took his hand, it was so thin, like parchment paper over bone. "Help is coming," I told him. He blinked, a single tear escaping the corner of his eye and disappearing into the pillow. Then, I heard it. A faint, distant wail that grew into a screaming roar. The sirens. To a criminal, that sound is a nightmare. To me, it was the sound of the truth finally arriving. When the red and blue lights started dancing against the wallpaper, I didn't feel relief. I felt a deep, hollow grief. I knew that once I opened that front door and let the paramedics in, the version of the family I had cherished was dead. There was no going back to Sunday dinners and birthday cards. I walked to the front door, my legs feeling like lead. I turned the deadbolt. I opened the door to the cold night air and the rushing feet of the medics. As they pushed past me with their equipment, I realized I wasn't just opening my house, I was opening a cage. And I was finally ready to let the truth fly out. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and the smell of industrial cleaner, but all I could feel was the weight of my purse, where my phone sat, holding the recording that would change our lives forever. They wouldn't let me back into the treatment room at first. I sat in a plastic chair that felt like ice, watching doctors and nurses run past with a grim kind of urgency. Every time a set of double doors swung open, I expected to see David and Chloe standing there, demanding to know why I'd ruined their plans. But they were still miles away, thinking their secret was safe in a quiet house with a quiet grandmother. Finally, a doctor came out. He didn't look like a man delivering good news. He pulled off his mask, and his eyes were hard. He asked me exactly what Mr. Henderson had been taking. I told him everything: the unlabeled bottles, the bitter powder in the cup, the coma that seemed to vanish the moment the captors left. The doctor sighed, a sound full of weary anger. He told me the toxicology report was already coming back. The levels of sedatives in that poor man's blood weren't just high, they were toxic. He used words like systemic overmedication and chemical restraint. But then he said the word that finally broke the last string of my hope: abuse. He asked me if there were any legal documents involved. That's when the social worker arrived, a woman with a soft voice but a notebook that looked like a weapon. I realized then that I couldn't protect David anymore. To protect my son now would be to assist in a murder. I pulled out my phone. My hands were cold, but they didn't shake this time. I played the recording for them. The room went silent, save for the tinny, distorted voice of Mr. Henderson whispering about the money and the dependable mother they were going to use. The social worker's face turned to stone. The doctor looked away. It's one thing to suspect greed, but it's another to hear it plotted in the dark. Not long after, a police officer joined us. He was polite, but he didn't mince words. He told me they were opening a criminal investigation for elder abuse and grand larceny. He asked me for the address of the house so they could secure the care station before David and Chloe returned. I gave it to him. Every digit of my son's address felt like a spoonful of ash in my mouth. I went in to see Mr. Henderson one last time before the police took my formal statement. He was hooked up to monitors now, but his color was coming back. When he saw me, he didn't say a word. He just reached out and squeezed my hand. It was the strongest I'd felt him yet. In his eyes, I saw the truth: I hadn't just saved his life. I had saved my own from becoming a footnote in their crimes. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, the engine off and the heater fading. I stared at the dashboard, waiting for the storm I knew was coming. Then, the silence was shattered. My phone lit up like a lightning strike in the dark. David. I let it ring. And ring. And ring. Then came a text from Chloe: "Martha, why isn't the house phone picking up? Is everything okay?" I didn't answer. I watched as 3 more missed calls from David flashed on the screen, followed by a flurry of messages that shifted from fake concern to sharp, jagged panic. I finally picked up on the 5th call. "Mom." Thank God, David's voice exploded through the speaker. He sounded out of breath. "We just got a notification from the security system. There are police at the house." "What did you do? Did the old man have a stroke?" "Tell them to leave, Mom, we're heading to the airport now." I took a breath, feeling a strange, cold calm settle over me. "He didn't have a stroke, David," I said, my voice as steady as the mountain. "He woke up. And he talked. He talked to me, he talked to the medics, and now he's talking to the police." The silence on the other end of the line was so thick I could hear his heartbeat through the phone. Then, I heard the ruffling of the handset. Chloe snatched it away. Her voice was no longer sweet. It was a serrated blade. "You stupid old woman," she hissed. "You have no idea what you've done. You just ruined everything. We were doing this for us, for our future. For your future. You've destroyed this family over the ramblings of a dying man." "No, Chloe," I whispered, and for the first time, I didn't feel any fear. "The family was destroyed the moment you decided my love was something you could use as a tool. Good people don't call the truth a ruin. Only people with a plan do." I hung up. I didn't want to hear her venom, and I didn't want to hear David's excuses. I blocked their numbers right there in the dark. I drove back toward the house one last time. Not to go inside, but to watch. I stood on the sidewalk across the street as the police carried out the boxes of evidence, the unlabeled bottles, the forged papers, the laptop. The house looked different under the street lamps. It no longer looked like a home, it looked like a shell that had finally been emptied of its rot. My heart was heavy, yes. I was a mother who had lost a son to greed. But as I looked up at the stars, I felt a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't the dependable victim they wanted me to be. I was a woman who had looked into the dark and refused to blink. I'm Martha. I've lived a long life, and if there's one thing I know for sure, it's this: the truth doesn't care how much it hurts. It only cares that it's told. And tonight, the truth is the only thing keeping me warm. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. This story was a hard one to tell, but it reminds us that we have to look out for one another, even when it's painful. If Martha's strength moved you today, please give this video a like. It helps our stories reach those who might need to hear them most. And before you go, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between a difficult truth and a comfortable lie? I read every single one of your messages when the house gets quiet. Don't forget to subscribe to American Granny Stories so you never miss a chapter. Stay safe, and keep your heart open.